Welcome, everyone, to Big Tent USA. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I am honored to welcome Dr. Austin Dennard, Julie F.K., and Bonnie Fuller to Big Tent. At Big Tent, we put democracy above partisanship. We are a national women-led voter coalition dedicated to protecting democracy, women's reproductive rights, and our children and grandchildren's future through education and civic engagement. I am so thrilled to introduce our women warriors. Julie F.K. is an experienced and passionate advocate for equality, an attorney, and an expert on women's human rights domestically and internationally. She is the founder and executive director of the Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine, and we will put the link in the chat so you can please take a look and support. She is the co-author with Catherine Colbert of the acclaimed Controlling Women: What We Must Do to Save Reproductive Freedom, which is now out in paperback. As the lead attorney who designed and litigated the landmark case ABC versus Ireland, Kay successfully argued before the Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights that Ireland's ban on life-saving abortion violated her client's human rights. Kay's legal work with the Irish Family Planning Association is credited with playing a vital role in abortion legalization in Ireland. Her experience in Ireland and countries around the world informs her strategies for abortion reform in the United States. Dr. Austin Dennard is an OBGYN from Dallas, Texas. Dennard had to leave Texas to receive abortion care after learning she was carrying a fetus with anencephaly, a fatal condition in which the skull and brain do not fully develop. Dr. Austin Dennard has served as a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist in the Dallas area since 2016. She began her medical career at the University of Texas Southwestern Health System, working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas. In addition to being a clinician, she has served as a clinical professor at UT Southwestern Medical Center. Bonnie Fuller is the former CEO and editor-in-chief of Hollywood Life and former editor-in-chief of Glamour, Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, and Us Weekly. She is now writing about reproductive freedom and politics for many news outlets, including Courier News and the American Independent, and has a new Substack, which I highly recommend, called Your Body, Your Choice. Ladies, thank you so much for coming to Big Tent. Bonnie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kitty, and thank you everybody for joining us today to talk about such a hugely important issue for now. And as Big Tent pointed out in the invitation for this event tonight, women's reproductive health is in the hot seat and it's on the ballot in November. And nowhere has it been more on the hot seat for longer than in the state of Texas, which enacted an extreme abortion ban a year ahead of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. And so I'm going to start with Dr. Dennard today because Dr. Dennard, you practice as an OBGYN in Texas, and you're practicing under the threat of a 99-year prison sentence and the potential to lose your medical license. I mean, these are it isn't just an extreme ban, but these are extreme penalties if you provide abortion care. And I believe that there's even fear in Texas to provide miscarriage care. So what has it been like, first of all, professionally, to be an OBGYN in Texas?
Well, thank you, Bonnie, so much for having me. And that's a really great question. So, like you said, I've been born and raised and lived here my whole life and came back here to do my training. And now practice in private practice medicine. So Texas has always had pretty extreme abortion bans, right? And they had them even when I was in my training, and it affected my training. My training was not the same as someone who trained on the East Coast or West Coast. But all I can say is, even despite the restrictive setting that I was in my training, since the fall of Roe, since the Dobbs decision, practicing medicine has become even more difficult. My specialty is incredibly restricted over what we can do now. And I think the main difference now is the silencing and the targeting threats towards physicians and counseling patients. I didn't do abortions before the fall of Roe, and I still am not able to do them now for any sort of pregnancy that has cardiac activity. But we are so silenced and have difficulty really talking to patients now because we feel like we could be thrown in jail at any moment.
So when you say you're silenced, what happens to you if you have a patient who maybe wasn't wanting an abortion, but has a pregnancy that does run into complications? And I'm just asking you this before we talk about your own pregnancy, but I believe you had patients that had issues, and were you not able to tell them even that they needed to leave the state if they needed an abortion?
There's so much fear for providers to even say the word abortion aloud now, and to even suggest where to go, where to find information, what place could be safe, counseling on whether or not someone might particularly need an abortion based on their diagnosis. There's so much fear that it's affecting the way that we talk to our patients and disseminate information for them. And through time, and I just continue to talk to my patients about it, and I go out on a limb and hope that the family member sitting in the room with them, that the aunt or the sister or the cousin that they talk to when they leave my office doesn't get really upset with the information that I provided for them and report me to whatever authorities they want to, saying that this physician is aiding and abetting this individual in having an abortion.
Right. So you're taking a chance every time you give them any advice about potentially leaving the state in order to save their own health.
Correct. The institution that I used to work for before I started a private practice that I'm sitting in right now, I had in the past patients who we're all familiar with electronic medical records, and a lot of us are able to contact our doctors or our providers through messaging. And we were told by our legal counsel that we should not disseminate any sort of information about how to obtain an abortion in writing. So I've had patients send me messages, and then I have to call them on the phone and say, I'm going to pretend like you didn't send that message to me, and let's just talk over the phone on where you can go to get care, because I just can't put myself out there and put any of this in writing.
Right.
And for someone that, for patient, I mean, we love our patients. We care about them so much. They're like family to me. And many of them are in dire situations. To have to say that on top of help giving them care is just, it's heartbreaking.
It's not like living in a democracy when you have to be silenced like that. Now, on top of you having to deal with this professionally, you also then personally found yourself in the situation where you got pregnant. And as Kitty mentioned, your baby had a fetal anomaly. It was not going to be viable. Can you share what happened to you and your experience and what you had to do?
Sure. So, like many others who were ready to start their families or continue their families, my husband and I were he's also an OBGYN. We were happy with our two little ones and wanted to add a third to the family. I had recently had a miscarriage, and we were so happy, a spontaneous miscarriage, and we were so happy to find out that I was pregnant again. And this was in the summer of 2022. We had already had a conversation, the two of us, about what we would do if I ever needed to have an abortion, not ever thinking that we would ever need one for a planned pregnancy. But considering the climate in Texas, that was an honest conversation that we had had. But needless to say, we were really excited to be pregnant again. And I went to a routine visit with my OBGYN, who I just love dearly, for blood work and for an ultrasound when I was 11 weeks pregnant. And as I was sitting in the ultrasound suite, I looked up at the screen and realized that I was looking at something that was catastrophically wrong with this pregnancy. There was no skull. There was very little brain. The head looked extremely abnormal. And it was a moment that I'll never forget, because you're sitting there really wanting to be, it makes me emotional every time I think about it, but we were so excited to have another baby, and to see something so catastrophic on the ultrasound and realize what it is. And then on top of it, thinking, I have no rights in my state. It does not matter that I'm an OBGYN. It does not matter that I know what's going on. Um, I have no rights. The state is completely controlling my body. And in order for me to get the care that I need, which for me was an abortion, this was not a pregnancy I wanted to continue, putting my life at risk, both physically and emotionally, I was going to have to flee the state and to get basic medical care. So that was what my husband and I had to do. We had to scramble. We had to find a place that we felt safe going to and get childcare. I had to have my colleagues take care of my patients in my absence. And because I'm so privileged, I was able to make that plane ticket and pay for the procedure that I needed. And we landed back in Texas 24 hours later, and I put my white coat on and started seeing patients again. And, as safe as my procedure was, the trauma of really going through that emotionally and realizing how little rights I had in that moment, and then how little rights my patients had. That was really the trauma that has continued, adding salt to the wound of trying to take care of patients in such a difficult climate, and reliving that trauma over and over again with patients who needed care, has been really difficult, but it's began a journey of advocacy and activism that I'm really proud that we're all about.
Well, we're very proud of you too. And so can you tell us why you decided then, because this was part of your advocacy, you actually joined a lawsuit with 19 other women in the state of Texas. And what were you trying to do? Because the state of Texas was only allowing abortions for the life of the mother, but also to prevent, from what I've read, prevent substantial impairment of a major bodily function. And yet that exception was not even allowing women who were near dying and who you would think would qualify for exceptions to get abortions. So what were you trying to do with the lawsuit?
Yes. So I found out about this lawsuit through my patient. So fast forward to a couple of months after my own abortion, of a known patient of mine who I loved dearly and taking care of her throughout her entire prior pregnancy, was pregnant again with twins. And we were so excited. But then we received some terrible news that she had one of the twin pregnancies was healthy, and the other one had a lethal genetic diagnosis, a fatal diagnosis. So navigating, helping her get out of state to have a single fetal reduction. So an abortion essentially of the twin that was really unhealthy, was difficult, as you guys can imagine, given the climate. So we did the pregnancy together. And at the very, very end of the pregnancy, at around 36 weeks, she was in my office and I was measuring her belly and we're talking. And she said, Dr. Dennard, I'm joining a lawsuit to help doctors like you take care of pregnant patients. And she told me about the lawsuit. She said, we're seeking to clarify the exceptions. We're seeking to clarify the language in the law so that doctors are not hesitant to take care of patients and they know when they can provide abortion care. Will you talk to my lawyer? And usually doctors don't really want to talk to lawyers. No offense, Julie.
None taken.
Yeah, but I said, yes, I want to talk to your lawyer. And when I spoke to her on the phone later that evening, I told her my abortion story and said, if you're looking for any more plaintiffs, I would be really interested in joining actually as a patient plaintiff. Thinking at the time that my story was not sad enough, that a privileged doctor getting on the airplane, going to get her procedure and coming back for a lethal anomaly was not sad enough to be chosen. But of course it wasn't sad enough. And that's just to give you an idea of what it feels like in the state. She said, yes, we'd love to have you. So I did join that lawsuit, which then opened up a lot more opportunity for advocacy. And to answer your question, long story short, looking to clarify the laws so that doctors could could provide care and feel safe doing so in Texas.
Now, Julie, the law, from my understanding, the decision with the Supreme Court in Texas is that they did not clarify the law at all, and that they put more onus on the doctors and said, oh, they just misunderstand the law. Now, these laws, these bans, they're written in a very ambiguous way, aren't they? I'm wondering if you can explain, and also explain why lawmakers are deliberately writing them this way so that doctors don't know when they can provide an abortion, when there can be an exception.
Well, and thank you, Bonnie, and to BigTent for having me on, and especially Dr. Dennard for telling your story. The personal is political is what they always said in the second wave feminism. Now the personal is political is professional for you. And I think, it really epitomizes the bind that these laws are deliberately putting women and pregnant people and their healthcare providers in. And in law, it's called the chilling effect, aptly named, as most of the country's under a heat wave. But, what happens is when there is a law that is, very vague or is threatening, they're going to stop providers from providing care. And we've seen this globally because as a provider, as a clinician, healthcare worker, you're driven to provide the best care for your patients, for all your patients. And if you have one patient who needs care, but you don't know if that means you'll lose your license, in Texas, you could go to jail. Providers have families and small children and responsibilities, and you could also have enormous civil fines in Texas. These laws are really meant to make doctors and advanced care practitioners think twice, three times before they provide healthcare when there's, as Dr. Dennard said, when there's evidence of a fetal heartbeat. And a lot of my experience globally has shown that in countries where abortion has been banned, this is, really has deadly consequences. I'm not a doctor, but I work closely with a lot of them, and I know that there isn't, patients don't come in with a sign saying, I have 20 minutes left until you won't be able to save my life, or, here's the right path, and it's very clear. It's an art and a science, and we rely on physicians' medical judgments in everything we do. And every time we go to a doctor, there's hopefully a conversation, there's symptoms, there's, each individual case. And here, what these states are doing with their anti-abortion animus is just stigmatizing and classifying every woman who's seeking to have an abortion as dishonest, as a troublemaker. Every doctor is incapable of making a decision. So it's the stigmatization and criminalization of healthcare that is really meant to put a wet blanket on access, even when women are facing life-threatening conditions or threats to their fertility or their well-being. And I think a lot of these cases show there isn't a real medical clarity, there isn't a legal certainty, and there's no striving to that. I thought that the Supreme Court of Texas's decision was very disingenuous in saying, no, you don't need this. Here we had experts and physicians, and a case that was wonderfully litigated by the Center for Constitutional Rights that was lock solid. But the Supreme Court of Texas does not want to hear it. They do not want to reach out and provide medical care or allow expert doctors to provide medical care.
No, I mean, they really don't. It's so obvious. The lawmakers write the law ambiguously, and then a Texas Supreme Court that's full of right-wing judges basically supports the lawmakers. But also, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Dennard, about the chilling effect on other reproductive health care in a state with an abortion ban, because, for example, there was just a kind of I don't know if you heard about this case in Texas, but a woman who, again, pregnant with a very much wanted pregnancy, had a miscarriage, an incomplete miscarriage. The fetus had no heartbeat, and it hadn't come out from her uterus. And her husband went public. He's been in the media. I've actually written about this. And she went to an emergency center twice, and then to a hospital, and was denied proper care. She ended up bleeding, unconscious, and nearly dying from the miscarriage. So there's a chilling effect on other reproductive health care in states like that. Are you seeing that?
There certainly is a chilling effect, and it's trickling down very quickly to the point where my story might seem like it's somewhat unique, and anencephaly is not incredibly common, but now we're seeing that you probably know someone who knows someone who's had to flee the state or has had a pregnancy complication, a complicated outcome because of these laws. So what I tell people, and I encourage everyone to do, is if you have the ability to become pregnant, you need to be making an appointment and sitting down and having an honest conversation with your provider about what their comfort level is, what the hospital is doing to keep people safe, what kind of lines of communication you can have, et cetera, et cetera. You need a game plan. You need a disaster relief plan, a game plan with your physician, because I feel comfortable in my particular hospital with my particular ER physicians and my nurses and my front desk. I know that if a patient of mine is coming into the ER at this particular hospital, I'm going to get a phone call and I'm going to be able to take good care of her. I just can't speak to all the other hundreds of hospitals in this large state. So it's now the onus is on us as women to advocate for ourselves and have those conversations. And not every provider is starting off your well woman visit saying, hey, let's talk about your abortion access and what's going on in Texas, because they're afraid to talk about it. So I try to bring it up even in an annual exam, if it's appropriate, so that the conversation gets started, because patients feel hesitant to put me in a litigious situation talking about what the rights are here.
Right. So basically what you're saying is that in abortion ban states, every pregnancy, it can be a high risk pregnancy because of the chilling effect on all of reproductive health care. Now, Julie, you have headed up a very effective effort to help women in abortion ban states to access prescriptions for medical abortion pills. So can you tell us about the work that you're doing with the Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine and what that is and how you're able to help women who are in these states?
Sure. Abortion Coalition for Telemedicine, or ACT, was formed in response to the Dobbs decision, which took away 50 years of established laws. We know my co-founders are two family care practitioners, longtime abortion providers who are similarly mission driven to Dr. Dennard. I think you hear that kind of passion for treating patients and recognizing reproductive health care as a human right. That's really the foundation of our work. And we were instrumental in passing what's called a telemedicine abortion shield law that now exists in 6 states, soon to be 7 when Maine joins. And we heard some good news out of Rhode Island today. And these laws protect the providers who have kind of virtual clinics where they can treat women in all 50 states, because the state is providing a shield and saying, if you're situated in New York, say, my home state, and you are serving women through telemedicine, no matter where in the country the patient is seated, we're protecting you in New York. We're saying this is legal health care in New York. And it's not a crime for a woman to take medication abortion anywhere in the country. And it's quite safe. We're not talking about kind of our grandmother's pre-Roe abortion, where there was a risk of loss of your fertility and other really serious concerns. Medication abortion has been proven globally to be quite safe, and we're having qualified physicians and advanced care practitioners prescribe FDA, for now, certified medications in proper dosage and with a screening process. And they send you the pills. There's mifepristone and misoprostol. They're 2 different medications. They're the same medications that if you were driving from Mississippi to Illinois, you'd get those pills in hand and you'd go back home and take them. Instead, you're going to your mailbox to get the pills. It's about $150 to $250 that most of these telemedicine virtual clinics charge. And there's communication and backup support. It's not ideal. There's still this chill that runs throughout everything. We would rather that everybody gets the kind of care that, I'm seeing already and have heard that Dr. Dennard and her partners and others that are very mission driven throughout the country provide. But it's working right now. 1/5 of all abortions in the country are done by telemedicine right now. The majority of abortions in the United States are done with medication abortion. That seems to be what people are choosing for various different reasons, both medical, personal, political, balancing, the fact that they can get the pills at home, not have to drive to a clinic, not have sort of the isolation and stigmatization of travel at times, and obviously the cost. And so we're right now, about 10,000 women each month are being served in the South section of the United States, of kind of the states where abortion is banned or restricted or just simply unavailable because there aren't clinics. And so this has been a really bright spot in helping women with uncomplicated first trimester pregnancies. And that's something I think that's really important. Also, when we talk about abortion, every person's experience is different. It's different medically, their circumstances are different, whether they have childcare responsibilities, whether they're being surveilled by a partner or by, our fairly racist criminal justice system, whether they have money to travel, whether they can get time off from work. There's so many different factors that go into this that we need to have a range of care and a range of options. And telemedicine has certainly been something that isn't right for everybody, but is an option that we want to make everybody aware of because it's safe, legal, and affordable.
Safe, legal, and affordable now. And the word, I mean, those are all important words. And mifepristone and misoprostol, they're very safe, correct? They're very safe drugs. Now, despite the fact that they are very safe, mifepristone has already been subject to a challenge from an anti-abortion legal organization, and they were able to get the challenge all the way through the Supreme Court and trying to make it illegal, trying to make the case that the FDA should not have approved the drug 20 years ago. For now, the Supreme Court has allowed it to remain accessible to doctors, but I don't think any of us can take comfort in that ruling, can we, Julie? Can you explain why?
So mifepristone is, a wonderful solution and a big sort of science win. And it has been the target of anti-abortion animus as a result. And there are many ways that anti-abortion politicians and activists are trying to come after the availability of mifepristone. One is the Supreme Court case that you mentioned that fortunately the court ruled on kind of legal standing grounds to, I guess, punt that argument to another day. I don't think by any means they were standing up for abortion rights, but the way the case came up, again, out of Texas, was so half-baked that even the Supreme Court justice, there was unanimity on the court. We have had Justice Thomas and Justice Alito mentioning the Comstock Act, which a lot of people have heard about. It used to be kind of a abortion rights joke or party trick, but it has become very serious now. It is a law from the 1800s that has been resurrected, or they're attempting to resurrect it, to ban mailing abortion pills or implements or tools across state lines. Right now, that's something that it's questionable, the legality of it. The Biden administration has put out a memorandum from the Department of Justice saying that law should have been taken off the books. It shouldn't be in effect right now. But we know that that is kind of the crown jewel of the anti-abortion movement. If they were given a chance to enforce it or to reenact it or to bring it up again, that's really going to pose a danger to medication abortion by telemedicine, but also, could be really interpreted broadly to ban the basic mailing of medical supplies that you need to perform surgical abortion as well. I saw something flap up in the chat about Louisiana, ! They are taking the lead in classifying these very safe and proven medications as controlled substances. Again, they're trying to chill anybody who would help women. And I think this is something that's particularly just disgusting, is that a lot of these laws are really aimed at people who would help and support women to find either information or to find services or to get a ride in a car. This kind of idea, this chest thumping of you're aiding and abetting that we're hearing from particularly politicians in deep red southern states is really, I think, appalling. Travel is isolating, it's alienating. When you travel, you don't have your usual health care. You don't have your bed at the end of the night. You're not able to bring your sister or your partner. You have an unexplained absence from work or for school, or you're missing wages. There's a whole range of difficulties in travel. And to try to make people do that, navigate a difficult pregnancy or a crisis situation unsupported is really appalling. And I think that's something that appeals to, so many of us rely on our women friends and family and others in our lives, whether they're clergy or family or others, to support us in those difficult times. And these laws are really trying to silence those supportive people as well as our own medical providers. So there's a lot going on right now. I'll pause there. So
Well,
Yeah, Julie, I'll just chime in. You're talking about what it's like to go travel. I remember when we got our flight information, and I thought, what do you pack for your out of state abortion? Like, what do I put in my suitcase? What am I going to wear on the airplane on the way home? What do I need to have with me? And just those, what kind of, can I bring a gift for the person who's saving my life and saving my future fertility, a stranger that I've never met? These are the questions that you have to ask yourself in the real life situation of having to travel. And it is absolutely mortifying. It really, really is. So I think that the emphasis on what that experience is like to have to go leave your home, leave your community, leave your state, leave your family, it cannot be overemphasized, which is why having access to medication abortion is so crucial. I mean, it's one of the many reasons why it's so crucial. And the importance of having mifepristone available is, I cannot say in enough words how important it is. Now in Texas, we have very little access to mifepristone. So when I am treating somebody who has had a fetal demise in the first trimester and needs or wants a medication termination for when there's no cardiac motion, no heartbeat, we use misoprostol solely without the help of mifepristone. Mifepristone and misoprostol together, as you guys know, is a symbiotic relationship. So there are ways to still help a patient have a medication abortion without mifepristone, but this is just another way that the anti-abortionists are trying to come after access to care. Travel bans, medication abortion, restrictions. They have a very calculated approach to this, and we have to stop it.
Well, it is a very calculated approach. And also since we're talking about the Comstock Act and medication abortion and chilling, like all of this, I think we have to talk about it. We have to talk about the possibility of a Donald Trump presidency and how that's going to affect the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, because this Supreme Court, which was his first Supreme Court, overturned Roe, got us into the situation we're in now. However, if he's reelected in November, he's going to have an opportunity to replace Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, who are both in their 70s, with younger judges who could be even more extreme and will be there for 40 years. Sonia Sotomayor is also almost 70 and not in great health. Plus, he's going to be able to appoint, let's say, 200 judges in 4 years to the federal judiciary. And he does have a plan called Project 2025 for governing, and it does specifically utilize the Comstock Act to do what Julie is saying, to make it illegal to ship medication abortion across the country and surgical equipment, so that he doesn't even have to get a national abortion ban through Congress. He could also just withdraw the drugs, tell his FDA chief to withdraw the drugs. And Project 2025 also recognizes fetal personhood, and which means that he's going after IVF. So, and contraception. Like it's a whole attack on full reproductive health care that we're looking at. And I don't, this is your specialty, both of you. What do you think we can do to make women aware of these threats? Because it's beyond abortion even.
I think talking about it, doing exactly what we're doing today, and really realizing that it was never about saving the babies. It was never about protecting families. It's not about that. It's about controlling women, forcing us to stay pregnant, forcing us to stay at home, forcing us to not get that graduate degree, not go out into the workforce, but to stay at home and stay pregnant. People told me that a year ago, and even myself thought, is that really true? Is that really true? And I think the hardest part for me personally this year, with everything I've done with my advocacy, sitting on the stand, testifying 34 weeks pregnant, testifying in DC, looking at all these senators face to face, telling my story, realizing that that is actually what it really is all about. It's about controlling us. So I think having the conversation and telling people, listening, we have to listen to each other. We have to give grace. We have to meet people where they are and emphasize that if there's one reason for you, as disillusioned as you might be with politics right now, as expensive as your milk carton is, or how much it is for you to put gas in your car, or the fact that you might not be able to buy a house, whatever, what's going on in Gaza, whatever, we have to go vote as if our life depends on it.
Because realistically,
I couldn't agree more. So I co-authored Controlling Women while Roe was still law of the land, and I got that kind of, well, is that a joke? Is it what? And it's like, no, it's a tongue-in-cheek reference to what this is about. And we wrote the book because we knew that Roe was not the answer even back then. As much as we miss it now, I think we can do better, and we will do better as a country to really have a human rights approach that recognizes that it's abortion, it's fertility treatment, it's, the right to choose whether, when, and with whom to have a child or not, and to raise that child with education and housing and food security. These are the packages of issues that I think abortion has become a stand-in the political football for years. And so if we value our ability as families to make those most fundamental decisions, we need to start acting it more and recognizing that this is not a religious issue. It never has been. Since time began, women have been making decisions about contraception and abortion and family planning that were different from the church hierarchies. And not all religions are on the same side of this as well, but it has been used as a wedge issue for far too long. And so, as we look at how we got here through electing President Trump. His trade-off with the far right was, I'll give you the court. Ignore my indiscretions, ignore my craziness, ignore everything you know about me, and I'll give you the court. And he delivered. These 3 ultra-conservative justices mean that there are now 6 vehemently anti-abortion justices on the Supreme Court. And when they took away Roe versus Wade and the federal constitutional right to privacy that underlay it, they put contraceptive access at risk for both married and unmarried people. Marriage equality is at risk, interracial marriage. There's a whole host of case law that is very dependent on the penumbra of privacy rights that Roe found in the Constitution and that have been built up through the cases around contraceptives, decriminalization of homosexuality. And so, this isn't a screenplay for The Handmaid's Tale. It is what is going on in this country right now. And I think, how we have those conversations, I can speak about it and people go, oh, a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. Dr. Dennard can speak about it and people listen a bit more because she has a personal story and medical expertise. But the people who are going to listen to you most and best are the people you already know. And so not everybody has to do the same thing. We always say you don't have to talk about your story if you don't want to. You don't have to engage at Thanksgiving if you're having a nice meal. And besides, it's after the election, so who cares? But you do have to start saying to people why these issues matter to me personally, to you personally, because I think that's what's going to save us, is that kind of recognition of what's at stake right now. And that, I think we will get to a better place, and we've seen that people want these rights, but we really need to inspire them to both vote, to encourage others, and to help get treatment for women who are in these real crisis situations, or even the normal situation of needing access to abortion.
And I
Well-
think people don't realize that sometimes I'll get the response of, oh, I tried talking to so-and-so about it, and they just feel like, well, I'm not having children anymore, so that just doesn't really affect me. And I mean, this will affect everyone. If women have no access to abortion, if women have no access to contraception, if IVF is taken away, this is of course going to affect everyone. And a lot of times I think about my 5-year-old daughter. I grew up with Roe. I think most people on this call, probably, I would think everyone grew up with Roe. And to think that she's growing up in a world where she'll just think, I don't have rights. That's just the world in which I've grown up in, and how that trickles down in different areas of her life and how she interacts in the world. It's just so disturbing to me to think that she won't have the same rights as my 2 sons. So talking to people about it in that way, I think, can make it much more universal instead of just talking about abortion.
Well, I think that we were talking a little bit before we actually all got on this call together about fear, that, fear is used to mobilize voters on other issues, fear of crime, fear of immigration. Well, in this case, we are living, there should be real fear. Women are losing rights over their bodies. Almost half the country, women have lost the rights to make a decision about their health care. Women could die. And in fact, I heard of at least one case where a woman probably did die in Texas because she couldn't get health care. But like, we literally are losing the ability to keep ourselves safe. And if you also can't make a decision about, if you don't have access to contraception, how's that going to affect like your relationships with a partner? Like, you cannot have intimate relationships anymore because you're going to be terrified about getting pregnant and what that's going to lead to. Like, I think people have to think about how our lives, is what we think of ourselves as having freedom in America and leading an American life, how it's going to fundamentally change if we have absolutely no ability to make decisions about these very basic things.
I think you're right. And there's it's interesting. The chat flashed up and said, well, the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful, we're not going to lose contraception. Yeah, there was a vote in the Senate to pass a bill that was looking to protect the right to contraception, and didn't pass. Didn't even get out of the Senate. Fell a few votes short. And for decades, we didn't bother to codify Roe, because why would we need it? Everything's fine. And so, I a little bit more hesitant to be fearful. I don't want us to be Chicken Little, except for the fact that the sky is really going to fall if we don't do something. And the hopeful part, the sort of, to steal from the page from the Obama campaign, is the hope is we can do something about it. We are the majority. 70% of Americans want the Roe versus Wade framework, but we don't get out and vote. We're disingenuous. We're not disingenuous, we're dissuaded, we're overworked, we're discouraged, we're, all these kinds of issues that are taking priority or deterring us from going to the polls. But the reality is we can fix this, and we can get, vote for the kinds of policies we want. We're not going to take over the Supreme Court for a really long time, but the Biden administration has appointed 200 judges. The state court judicial elections matter enormously, and we saw the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, when that became about abortion, we won. So there's a lot to be hopeful about. And I think those of us who are kind of lucky enough, or dare I say privileged enough, to be having these conversations, to have this information, really need to dig in, from now through November, and really, work double time, because there are women and people who are affected by these bans and by these limitations that are barely keeping head above water with, the current economy in some ways, and their own situation. And so I'm always happy to be able to be the one saying, come on, join us, let's do this. And I think in some ways this is, I'm already preaching to the army here at BigTent, because people are so engaged. But I think leaning into that message of really saying this matters now, and there's the wolf is at the door, and we got to keep him away.
Right. And I mean, apparently about 20% of independent voters don't even know whether it was Biden or Trump who is responsible for Roe being overturned. So you can't assume that all the people that you talk to understand that, yes, you've got to vote for pro-choice candidates, and pro-choice candidates are usually Democratic candidates. Like, they don't even know that. So you have to spread that information. Now, Ireland, you were involved, Julie, in Ireland. Ireland was basically like Texas. You couldn't.
Texas wants to be like Ireland. I mean, there was a constitutional provision in the Irish Constitution that equated the life of the so-called mother with the life of the so-called unborn. It was that fetal personhood bill that
America wants to be like that if Donald Trump and his crew get in. So they had equal. So women, now, can you tell us how they surmounted that? Because they ended up in the whole country voting to overrule that law. But there were famous cases of women dying, weren't there?
Yeah. So Ireland was, the jewel in the crown of the anti-abortion movement for a long time. It had this constitutional provision. It had created fetal personhood. And the reality was, this was before medication abortion was widely available. The ban started in 1983. So women would take what was called the Irish journey, where they would travel to England or other places. And it was shameful and stigmatizing, very much what we're seeing today in the US. For some people, it was the first time a teen had ever been on a plane, or they had to get a passport, or they had to get a driver's license the way they do here. So it was that difficult journey, and it was very much a powerful religious minority and hierarchy that controlled the government. Again, similar to here, it was a wedge issue, and there was a lot of popular support for abortion rights, but it had been criminalized for so long that it was very chilled speech. It was stigmatized. People would sort of whisper abortion. And, I moved there and started working with a great group of activists who were very much on the defense. And so over a number of years, we became more assertive and aggressive. The Women on Waves abortion ship was its first voyage was to Ireland when I was living there. And that was a very creative and inspiring project where Dr. Rebecca Gompertz created a ship that we would bring women 12 miles out to sea into international waters and give them medications. That got a lot of people talking about abortion in the way that Dr. Dennard's story has, that these stories matter, bringing public attention matters. And so that was a piece of it. I brought a case challenging Ireland's ban on abortion to the European Court of Human Rights, and that case was successful, but it took a long time. And in the meantime, we really reframed this as a human rights issue about the decision about whether, when, and with whom to have children or not, to protect your bodily autonomy, your liberty to live free from discrimination. And that shifted it away from this kind of classic debate of, oh, it's controversial, it's a religious issue, it's about when life begins, and really put women in the center and our human rights at issue there. And we elected the right people. So we took that case out of the European Court. We took that decision and started bringing it to Parliament, where we had elected women who knew and who cared, not just women who were like, well, I'm pro-choice, but women who were really like, abortion is a fundamental human right and we need to protect it. So there's always that difference in, are you voting for somebody who's kind of like raising their hand and saying they're pro-choice, or somebody who's really a champion and leading the rights? And the case that you refer to, Bonnie, is one of the, I think, most heartbreaking and tragic cases I've seen in decades of doing this work. There was a young woman named Savita Halapanavar. She had a wanted pregnancy. At 17 weeks, she had some bleeding and went into a hospital in Galway. And the doctors didn't know what to do. You know, there's life imprisonment for violating the clause, lose your license, all the same kinds of things we're seeing in Texas and other states now. And so they sought more information. They had her wait. She was, you know, remained in the hospital. They didn't treat her because they still heard a fetal heartbeat. 4 days later, when they decided that they could terminate the pregnancy, it was too late. She had sepsis and she died. And this was a young woman. She was from India, as was her husband. So they were very public about it. It takes a lot of bravery to stand up and have people judging your decisions, your family, your face in this country. And I admire Dr. Dennard and all the women who have done that in the Texas case and elsewhere. And so in Savita's case, it was game changing. The European Court of Human Rights had told Ireland they have to fix their law. This tragedy happened. We had the right politicians in place. And the tipping point, we had mass protests in Ireland. And that's something we have not seen in this country. We have not seen enough reaction to Dobbs. We have seen, you know, some groups at the Supreme Court steps. We've seen some online organizing, but I think until we join sort of what's called the green wave of activism that worked in Argentina and Mexico and other places that have seen legalization, until we get more people out in the streets and really, you know, bringing back the kind of march that we saw after Trump's election in 2016, we're going to be overlooked and we're going to be horse traded away. And there's an energy and enthusiasm, and that kind of brought us into in Ireland into a referendum where people overwhelmingly voted to legalize abortion. And you know, it's a pretty happy ending story. There's still some problems, but it's definitely a model for kind of the different pieces that we need to put into place here.
Well, I think one of the mysteries is that I have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is why we aren't seeing women marching in the streets about this. I mean, as I said, it's almost half the country. Women have lost their rights. It is an election issue. We've seen energy to get constitutional like amendments to have the protection for abortion on some of the state ballots. And yet women aren't mobilizing. And I'm wondering why not. I'm also kind of wondering why doctors across the country haven't mobilized. Like, could there be doctors walking out en masse to protest what's going on? Is that a possibility?
As a doctor, I will say there's so much fear of speaking out about abortion because media clauses, contracts were hospital employees. You don't, and there's just, it's fear, Bonnie. It's fear. It's the overwhelming majority of physicians are, of course, pro-choice. I wish that my colleagues were as vocal as I am, but not everyone feels the same amount of comfort. My ability to speak out is that I can always speak out as a patient.
And I think there's fatigue. I mean, we call it abortion fatigue. And so we do have to be creative and fun. I mean, you know, we always say, like, grab a friend and go do something. I had a nail polish company who created a red called "You Don't Control Me" that they used as a fundraiser for a local abortion fund. We had there was a group, Contraceptive America, that had a giant inflatable IUD in front of Union Station in Washington that, you know, we need a bit of levity. We're competing for people's eyeballs and clicks and those kinds of things. And, you know, Bonnie, you've helped us talk like, or me especially, talk like human beings and not lawyers. And we need to have more of those conversations. And not everybody can march every day. And there is, you know, there's threats to people when they're marching, there's policing practices. And as Dr. Dennard said, there's, you know, stigmatization from employers and those kinds of things. But we can all do something, and we can all find that space where our voice is more effective, and our written word and our conversations with friends. And, you know, there's so much support for abortion rights. We don't have to be scared as individuals about talking about it, because the chances are that, you know, with 1 in 4 women having had an abortion, as they say, everybody loves somebody who's had an abortion. We all know and love and have somebody in our life who has had an abortion or need an abortion. And so, you know, we need to be on the front foot a little bit more. And I think these kinds of conversations and the activities that BigTent are doing is so much a part of, like, bringing us together to really be bold in our thoughts and in our words.
There's something else that I think that women need to think about, but also I guess all Americans need to think about, is that the states where these bans are in place are not like, first of all, OBGYNs, I admire the fact that Dr. Dennard, you're staying in Texas, you're doing your best, but many OBGYNs are leaving those states. And a state like Idaho, they've lost almost 50% of their OBGYNs. And the other problem is they're not training OBGYNs. And so they, like, you literally apparently cannot be trained to be an OBGYN to complete your certificate in these states. You have to go out of the state in order to still learn the skills to provide abortion and miscarriage care. So there are long-term repercussions for these kind of laws. And even if this becomes national, doctors are not going to get proper training, which is going to endanger, again, every single woman who gets pregnant or has other reproductive health care issues.
We've
And
seen
that's not an
the
accident. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, we've seen the number of applicants for OBGYN specialty decrease significantly in the past couple of years. OBGYN specialists that are moving out of state to different areas, not performing, not practicing the obstetrical side, only the gynecologic side. This is all downstream effects, and it will lead to less care for sure.
Less safe pregnancies for women who don't think these bans are going to affect them.
Can I add one little optimistic note before we close? I think that there is a lot of activism that can be done. There are a lot of people like Dr. Dennard out there. There are a lot of telemedicine shield providers who do help and want to continue to help and raise their voices. And I think that is what will see us through this.
Yes, ladies, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. It was so rich. It was so personal. I know we all got a lot out of it, and a personal thank you to Dr. Dennard for doing what you're doing. There were a lot of comments in the chat, just how uniquely how unique your voice is and how important it is, and so brave of you to just step out into the void like this, but we really need you, and we're so grateful. And we're grateful to all of you, to Julie for your work. We put the link in the chat to Controlling Women. Bonnie, thank you so much for helping bring this together. We really appreciate it, and want to remind everyone to please check out the Center for Reproductive Rights, check out Julie's website, ACT, and her book Controlling Women. And we'll continue this conversation. We're not giving up. We're going to make sure that this is not the future for American women, not under our watch. So good night, everyone. Thank you for coming to Big Tent.